Hello students, and welcome to the second of 3 online flipped classroom lectures. In the previous lecture, we went over an introduction to William Shakespeare and his most popular play, Romeo and Juliet. After I asked you to read Acts 1 and 2 for homework, while selecting some lines that you think speak to you or confuse you, in this lecture we will be looking at some of the information from the first 2 acts, as well as describing the themes presented throughout the play. I will also introduce the activity planned for the third lecture, in which you will compare and contrast Romeo and Juliet to a newer stage or screen adaptation. Remember, after you have watched each video, make sure to post a comment in the comment section describing what you learned from this video and what you feel you need more information on. So where do we begin with Acts 1 and 2? The first act opens up on a discussion between 2 servants of the Capulet family, trying to initiate a quarrel between the other Montague servants. They are then interrupted by Benvolio, Romeo's cousin, who is then interrupted by Tybalt, Juliet's cousin. The two then square off in the streets of Verona, and you all as readers can start to picture how intense the rivalry is between these 2 families. As we are introduced to Romeo, the reader sees that Romeo has been feeling rather depressed because he is in love with a woman who chooses to remain celibate and will not return his advances. As we meet Juliet, she believes that she is too young to marry, being only 13 years old. However, she is dictated into a relationship between a wealthier man named Paris. It is then announced that the Capulets are throwing a party, and the woman of Romeo's affection, Rosaline, was announced to be in attendance. Sneaking into the party to try and find Rosaline, he instead stumbles upon Juliet, and it is love at first sight. One quote in particular from the text mentions, "Oh, she doth teach the torches to burn bright. It seems she hangs upon the cheek of night, as a rich jewel in an Ethiop's ear." However, Tybalt notices Romeo in attendance and prepares to fight him, but the fighting is avoided by Lord Capulet, who does not want the revelry to be ruined. As Romeo and Juliet are separated by their respective families, the first act ends with Romeo realizing that Juliet is a Capulet, and vice versa. It is then in the second act of Act 2 where Romeo and Juliet exchange their loving devotions toward each other. With this, Romeo approaches Friar Lawrence with plans to marry Juliet, and the rest of the second act focuses on Romeo's plans to marry Juliet. Now with this information, let's look at some of the themes that are presented in the first 2 acts. Now obviously, Romeo and Juliet is the quintessential love story. At its core, Romeo and Juliet is the epitome of young, unrequited romance, and the universal theme of love helps make the play relevant to modern audiences. The theme of love also coincides with the theme of family, and Romeo and Juliet's undying, or should we say dying, love serves as the branch that connects the 2 rivaling families. Also, each character somewhat sees love in a different perspective. Mercutio thinks love is just a connection for sexual pleasure, while Lady Capulet wants Juliet to marry Paris so that she can have access to his material possessions, and only focuses on each character's outward appearance. The next theme that we're going to focus on is power. Now both Romeo and Juliet are caught up in a complicated relationship, and it heavily involved in family drama, conflict, and rivalry. Now both feel powerless in their families, and Juliet, being a young teenage girl, also feels no power when it comes to her parents wanting her to marry Paris. Lastly, from a characteristic standpoint, Shakespeare makes it notable to distinguish between the royal characters from the servants and lower class. The final theme that we're going to be addressing is duality, especially the difference between light and dark. Obviously, the duality is also important in the format of the play, as the first couple of acts are seen as lighter than the later acts, which are darker. In the first few acts of the play, the reader can obviously distinguish that both characters experience both emotional low points and high points. At the beginning of the first act, the reader notices that Romeo seems rather melancholy, but of course, after he meets Juliet, then he suddenly experiences an emotional high point. With Shakespeare bringing up light and dark as duality, Acts 1 and 2 also feature several lighter words, such as radiant, golden, glowing, or some other light-related word that may also associate with fire or brightness. For example, one quote from Act 2, Scene 2 says, "The brightness of her cheek would shame those stars, as daylight doth a lamp." Also, most of the light imagery, as mentioned, takes place in the first couple of acts in the play, and the darker imagery takes place in the later parts of the play. Now with this, let's take a look at a video found from YouTube that features several themes mentioned.
You don't even need my help on this one. Romeo and Juliet's biggest, most obvious theme is, let's see if we agree. Stay tuned. Love. You knew that was the answer, didn't you? But love is a little simple. Let's call Romeo and Juliet's most compelling theme the power of love. Think about what love gets people to do in this play. It compels them to deny their families, to forget their friends, to confront their enemies. It pits them against their own community. Love even invites death. Okay, and here's something that's even cooler about this theme. It's represented not just in the action of the play, but even in the language of the play. What is love according to Shakespeare? Is it magic? Is it death? Is it a passion that can't be resisted? Well, yes, it's even a kind of religion. Remember when Romeo and Juliet first meet? Shakespeare uses words like shrine, sin, and devotion. And Romeo says, "For saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch, and palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss." In fact, it may be Shakespeare's language that gets his theme across best of all. The true power of love lies in the fact that it simply can't be captured in words.
Now after watching the 60-second recap video, what's going on through your mind? Do you agree or disagree with the power of love theme that the woman in the video is discussing? Jot down some ideas or opinions and bring them into class tomorrow. Also, I have some discussion questions for each of you to respond to, and post your answers in the comments section below. What other themes do you notice in Romeo and Juliet? Which theme presented in the text do you feel most intrigued by? Now when you are reading Acts 3 and 4 for homework, discuss some of the other themes that occur in those acts. Also, if you notice anywhere within Acts 3 and 4 where you see love, power, or duality being featured, make sure to take a note of that and refer to it tomorrow. Now for homework, I would like you to read Acts 3 and 4 of Romeo and Juliet, and also discuss some of the themes presented in the text and use information from this presentation to help you. Also, in preparation for the third flipped classroom lecture, select a popular stage or screen adaptation of Romeo and Juliet for the next lecture. These adaptations will be compared and contrasted to the original play. On the next lecture, we're going to discuss various Romeo and Juliet stage and screen adaptations, and we'll also select a couple in which we will compare and contrast them to the original work. Don't forget, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, email me at ccw12b@my.fsu.edu, and I'll make sure to respond as quickly as possible. I'll be back soon with the third and final flipped classroom lecture, and with that said, enjoy your reading.